Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, February 9th, 2018. Moving on in the February category. Nearly 10 days in. And there's not that many days in February. The year progressing quickly. Good. Racing towards the midterm elections. I guess I'm fine with that. And racing eventually, in the long run, toward 2020. If we can't get rid of Dr. J. Trump any sooner than that. Let's see. Things to round up this morning. Well, gee whiz. What's happening this morning? Looks like Mike Pence expressing his bafflement about the Rob Porter story. Once again, left out of the loop, and that now becoming a question among the press corps that follows him. I see that The Hill is reporting on an exchange caught on video, as many of the exchanges often are, of a reporter confronting Pence about that and asking him, why are you so often, quote, out of the loop on major news? That's a good question. He seems to duck everything and be involved in nothing. And I understand that that's sort of the role of the vice presidency in a way. But it's almost as if someone had counseled him, you need to keep your nose out of absolutely everything. Deny knowledge of anything that comes up. Because even the people who are wise to Trump and want to get rid of him are worried about leaving you in place. And there's a major undercurrent to the Let's Impeach Dr. J. Trump movement that labels itself the Get Pence First movement. And of course, there's plenty of evidence that he's wrapped up in a lot of these things. Much of this stuff happened or a lot of these people were placed in the positions that they were in, or the faults that would ordinarily have kept them from government service in the first place became apparent during the transition. And of course, he famously took over the transition, but knows nothing about anything the whole way through. All right. Well, let's see. We'll see if we can catch on with all of the other things happening this morning. And of course, it being Friday, we are unfortunately without the services of Greg Dworkin to round up our morning. We're going to have to actually sort of do this manually. So yeah, I think we're already outdated in our morning post. And we'll have to try and figure out exactly what happened this morning, because of course it happened overnight, and I wasn't about to sit there and watch them waste their time with this stuff. But at the time of, I guess what you would call press time or deadline time for the morning post for today's radio show, which was a little bit past midnight. And I mean, come on, I want to go to sleep at some point. We saw the government slip into shutdown again. And as I understand it, the situation is, and you could see the hedging in the post written last night, that something might happen in between midnight and, say, 6 a.m. this morning, and it did. But apparently they slipped over the midnight deadline, though essentially intentionally. Apparently Rand Paul decided that he was going to have a mini shutdown all to himself. He was upset with some of the way in which the deals were being handled, and kept objecting to unanimous consent requests for the Senate to strip out the language in an existing House vehicle. You'll remember that Greg brought that whole maneuver up the other day, and approve it, insert their budget deal, send it over to the House, and quickly approve it before midnight. And he essentially insists that they not even begin floor consideration of that whole, both the substantive bill and the maneuver they were using to pass it until at least 12:01. He actually basically just said, I need there to be a shutdown and then a recovery from it for whatever reason. And no one can really figure that out. And we'll try and pour through some of the morning headlines to figure it out. The bill, though, was, in fact, finally passed in the Senate, sent on to the House. And the House, as I understand it, took it up and ended up passing it somewhere in like the 5 a.m. Eastern time hour. and it's been sent over to the White House, and Donald Trump has gotten his crayon box out and has apparently signed it. The Hill reporting that this just in, Trump signs funding bill to end government shutdown. But I know there's a lot of confusion about the bill and about the maneuvers used to pass the bill, and especially the confusing line that is being delivered. It seems to be accurate, but it's almost as though it were designed to confuse the news media delivering the news this morning that a new 2-year budget deal has been reached, and it's attached to a funding measure that will keep the government open for another 2 months or 3 months or something like that. Or is it, maybe it's 2 months, into late March, as I recall. We'll double check on all the details. But of course, you've heard enough about the budget process and what a budget is and what a budget isn't to know that, yes, that's in fact possible. Yes, you can have a 2-year agreement about the budget or even a budget itself, and that won't fund the government. Budgets don't fund the government. Appropriations bills fund the government. Yes, budgets lay out how much money can be available for various functions of the government when you get about, the task of actually funding it with appropriations bills. But budgets and appropriation bills are different things entirely, and no surprise that it would be confusing. All right. The other things happening this morning, lots, I guess, beginning to shake out on the Trump-Russia front. We'll have to check in on that and the latest on Oleg Deripaska. He's all over the place. And, much, much more, let's say. That's the sort of thing that broadcast productions say about themselves when they aren't sure what they're going to do next, right? That and much, much more. Bill in Portland, Maine begins our day with a morning tweet. Not always, he's usually there each weekday morning. Friday is sometimes a day off because, of course, his own appearance on the front page of Daily Kos comes in the PM hours. And I don't know. I figured you slept in on Friday, but he's up today because they were working hard overnight to keep the government funded. You probably stayed up and watched C-SPAN. That's what's going on. Right, sure. Daily Kos Radio is live now. That's what this noise is. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Kagro X recaps the budget agreement. Maybe, sort of. And whatever other insanity dropped overnight. And, it's basically how we're going to have to approach the show at this point. All right, let's see. Oh, I got some must-reads coming in. It's always a good day when we start with must-reads. It feels like it. There's an awful lot. Okay, let's see. First, we'll start with I must open up my pocket list here and look for the stories on the budget stuff. It's just been kind of crazy. Let's see. Bloomberg, I think, may have the rundown we want to go to on this one, just because I know that their reporter on this front, Sahil Kapoor, was basically up all night and tweeting and watching very closely what was going on, and was the loudest in my Twitter timeline grousing about the insanity of everything that was going on, and in particular about Rand Paul and what he was doing. And he has this solo effort posted at 3:38 a.m. Yeah, this morning. Okay, Rand Paul stirs Senate anger over protest that led to shutdown. That sounds familiar. I feel like we've been there before. Used to be Ted Cruz, of course, doing all this, but Rand Paul, a familiar player in this particular drama. He loves crap like this. Let's see, some bullet points up at the top here that serve as subheaders to the story. Republican colleagues fume at Paul's move to force shutdown. He wanted attention, and he got attention, Inhofe says. Senator Rand Paul forced a temporary government shutdown on Friday to lecture his GOP colleagues about fiscal responsibility. That seems backwards, don't you think? But the lesson they took away was probably not the one the Kentucky Republican intended. He wanted attention, and he got attention. That's it, said Senator James Inhofe, a Republican from Oklahoma. He doesn't want nuance. He just wants to tell you it's all about attention for him. All right. Paul used his clout as a senator to deny the unanimous consent needed for a speedy vote in order to protest $300 billion in deficit-financed spending in a 2-year bipartisan budget agreement. So, rather than take a quick vote Thursday afternoon, senators were left watching the clock tick past midnight, the deadline for Congress to extend government funding. All right, so at least we know what Ron Paul, well, it's basically Ron Paul. It's Rand Paul this time, his son. We hate political dynasties here in the United States, and if you're watching or listening from the UK, you know that we hate political dynasties, only we really don't. We just didn't like yours. I mean, to be perfectly honest. Okay. Well, no difference in politics now than there was in politics then, I guess, in that case. Anyway, it was Rand Paul, and I guess whatever it was that bothered him. I mean, normally you say, oh, well, he's a deficit hawk and a debt hawk and a what other kind of hawk? Fiscal responsibility hawk. And they're all different things, just as we might as well pause just to remember this. Just as budgets and appropriations bills deal with similar issues but are different things, debt and deficit, same issue, describing different aspects of the way we borrow money and what happens to it afterwards and over what term we're borrowing. But okay, I guess the idea of, he says he's protesting the $300 billion in deficit-financed spending in this new 2-year budget agreement. But as many, many people were pointing out, it was a little bit ridiculous for him to be protesting $300 billion in deficit-financed spending, which sounds bad for those of us who have been trained in reading the newspaper here in America. Deficit bad, deficit bad. We don't want that. Why, if you were running the government like you were running your family budget or your business, blah, 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 et cetera, and 1,000 reasons why that's a terrible way of thinking of things, you wouldn't want deficit-financed spending? Well, I don't know. I mean, how big is my family? Is there 300 million people in it? Maybe I would. Anyway, $300 billion in deficit-financed spending apparently bothered him. But as all the people watching were pointing out, $1.5 trillion, and that's net. $1.5 trillion net, given away in ridiculous and unnecessary and unhelpful tax cuts in the Republican so-called tax reform bill. That didn't bother him. That got his support. So, I mean, I don't know if you know anything about math, but $1.5 trillion, actually more, much more really, than $300 billion, all of it going to be deficit financed in the end, so I don't know why, or I guess we could say debt finance. There's debt-backed expenditures, tax expenditures. And remember, again, $1.5 trillion is the net result of all of the tax bill. There are a lot of tweaks to it that will raise taxes on people who aren't American oligarchs, and so mitigate the full gross tax cut. I mean, they gave away, it's a $2.5 trillion tax expenditure, but we recoup $1 trillion in that elsewhere from other people, not those who will, for the most part, then eventually enjoy the $1.5 trillion in net tax relief in the end. Relief. Even that is a bad frame. Okay, well, anyway, so he objected to the vote, but there's nothing in this article so far, although, granted, though we've been talking about it for 15 minutes, we've only gotten about 3 sentences in on this thing. But I don't think that there's anything going to turn up either. There's nothing about what Rand Paul did in delaying the vote until past midnight, well past midnight, that actually fixed the bill. He just simply, I mean, I guess in a way, Inhofe says all he wanted was attention. And from the Rand Paul perspective, what you would say is, well, the attention that I wanted wasn't for me and my lovely curly locks. They get enough attention from my neighbors who beat the crap out of me every once in a while. But I wanted attention for the issue. Imagine that. Attention for the underlying substance of the fact that they are, in fact, going to add another $300 billion in deficit financed spending. They're busting the caps in all of this. The caps, of course, holdover from the sequestration process. Sequestration process, a holdover from the super committee process that never worked and never did anything because, lo and behold, if you put equal numbers of Senate Democrats and Republicans on a super committee, you will come out deadlocked and not be able to do anything. I was apparently the only one in the world able to predict this, except for everybody else who read the articles about the super committee way back when. But I bring that up because and we'll see whether any of the articles I have cover it, but I did see rumored anyway on Twitter last night, and it will probably remain a rumor for some time. It was a rumor that there was some super committee-like structure proposed and included in the budget deal / spending bill that got passed last night, in which President Trump signed apparently early this morning, which would be remarkable because the last one didn't work, and the whole hubbub over in the overnight hours was about holdovers from the last time they proposed something that dumb and it failed. But now we have new people to fail with, or at least a few anyway. So we'll see. I say it was a rumor and probably remain a rumor because, of course, the bill was A, voted on overnight, and B, written hours prior to the overnight fight, and no one really has had a chance to comb through it in its entirety. So I guess that'll be a weekend task, and then Monday and Tuesday we'll be talking about the garbage that was secretly hidden in there and how outrageous it was, and then probably bashing people over the head for having voted for it, or maybe even voted against it. I don't know. We'll find out. So where were we? So Paul used his clout as a senator to deny unanimous consent, pushed the vote back past midnight. I don't think it made any substantive changes, but he wanted the symbolism of there being a shutdown in order to note the fact that $300 billion in extra spending was being shoehorned in. Once the time on Paul's objection ran out, and after the government technically was shut down, senators strolled back into the chamber at 1 a.m., many of them dressed casually, and some looking exhausted. By 2 a.m., they had voted on the budget bill, and it passed easily, 71 to 28. I wonder about the end game of people who keep us here until 1 o'clock and achieve nothing, said Senator Richard Shelby, an Alabama Republican. Senate Finance Chairman and Utah Republican Orrin Hatch said he had a rough time finding meaning in Paul's protest. Of course, from Paul's perspective, $300 billion. If you're having a tough time finding the meaning of that, then I guess I can't help you and you're a lost cause. But of course, the $300 billion got spent anyway, or was planned for being shoveled into the flames later on. So I guess Orrin Hatch sort of kind of has a point in that too. Democrats, who in other circumstances might have embraced Paul's message that Republicans were being hypocrites, were equally chagrined. Waste of time, said Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii. And it sort of was. To me, it looked like he was clueless, and he may be, said Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill. I didn't see any purpose. Interesting, though, because, of course, over on the House side the other day, there was a similar exercise in a way. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's 8-hour filibuster speech in support of the Dreamers and their stories and the necessity of passing a DACA fix, which also isn't a part of this, was hailed by many on the left-leaning side as though symbolic, perhaps useful or at least symbolically powerful anyway, stance in solidarity, even though it didn't actually get anything done. Some of the harder core progressives out there who are critics of, pretty much everything, and very often, of course, have a real point in being critics, and their role is different than those of party insider institutional congressional Democrats, were quick to point out that as nice as it was to have that voice of support, it didn't change anything, and there's no DACA fix in this bill and no indication of where leverage might be found anytime in the future before the March 5th self-imposed by Donald Trump deadline actually approaches. So, there's a point in that too. Would Claire McCaskill say she didn't see any purpose, though, in Nancy Pelosi's speech? Maybe, maybe not. just pointing out that it's very similar in nature. Anyway, Paul strategist Doug Stafford said the senator merely wanted a vote on an amendment to preserve existing spending levels and delayed the vote because his request was denied. And, I'll put it this way in terms of his use of the tactic. He's very well aware of the fact that senators, as I think I've referred to them in the past as sort of as nuclear-tipped missiles, every single one of them can do something like this. You ask for an amendment. Well, I don't believe we should be adding another $300 billion in deficit-financed spending to our upcoming 2-year budget package. So I want an amendment and the opportunity for senators to go on record as saying either I agree with that or no, go ahead and add another $300 billion in deficit-financed spending to our next budget. I'm cool with that. And, the majority leader or, this particular majority leader, of course, McConnell or any other majority leader would have had a good point in saying, I think I know where the Senate stands in that. And it's really a waste of time. You're going to lose. And you're probably going to lose on the order of about 80-20 or worse on that question. And Rand Paul says, I don't care. I want the opportunity to show that I'm against it and see if I can't get a few other deficit hawks to do the same and or highlight the hypocrisy of Republicans who say they're deficit hawks and will nonetheless vote for an extra $300 billion in spending. Again, fine and dandy, I guess, in a vacuum, but a little bit odd given how recently Republicans voted to give away, 20 times that amount? Do I have my math right? $300 billion, 10 times that amount would be $3 trillion and $1.5 trillion. Yeah, so the net amount is about 20 times as much, and that didn't bother him at all. So while it's true that it's an opportunity to highlight hypocrisy, it also highlights a very different hypocrisy. Well, or rather, a distinct hypocrisy, but a very similar hypocrisy. I should have said it that way. All right, so that's where we were. He wanted a vote on an amendment to preserve existing spending levels, not raise the caps, not add the extra $300 billion. And they said no. And now the only real protest he has available to them is to say, well, if you say no to me, then I'm going to be mad and not give you my vote in a unanimous consent request. And that's just what he did. And although it was stupid, what is the alternative? If you want to be a senator, if you want to be a player in all this, you want to have people worry about it when you say, I demand a vote on something, and they either say, screw that guy, what's he going to do, demand a vote? I'm not going to give him the vote. And then they didn't. And so he says, all right, then you all have to wait. You'll all have to stay up late. And I guess it's funny. It's the same game, basically, that they played with the last shutdown, where Republicans were saying, it's Democrats' fault, despite the fact that we control all three branches of government, essentially. And every time we say that, it's shorthand it's really meant to be shorthand for the House, the Senate, and the White House. That's not really the three branches of government. But the third branch of government, of course, being the judiciary, and they basically have leveraged there, too, to which I think they can lay a pretty serious claim to controlling that one, at least at the Supreme Court level at this point. But whatever, that's not really what we're talking about. But in control of the House, Senate, and the White House, unable to, control spending or keep the government open, all things that they don't actually really want to do ultimately. But it's, it is worth pointing out that, they can't seem to keep their act together, and they keep trying to solve these issues. Even when they try and come up with what looks like a bipartisan solution, they come up with these stupid super committee things and sequestration ideas, and then they want to back out of them. And if somebody says, look, I think we ought to have a vote on this, even if I'm going to lose. If you don't appease him once in a while, he'll exercise his opportunity to shut the place down and make you stay up late. And if you don't want to stay up late, you could caved to his demand, right? And so this time they're all laying the blame for the shutdown on Rand Paul. In other words, here you got a situation where the majority says, this is what I want. Some minority, in this case, one person, one senator, says, well, I want something else, and I'm not going to agree to go forward with you in time to avoid the shutdown. So the question is, who's at fault for the shutdown? The person who says, because you didn't agree to my request, I'm not going to agree to your request? Or is it the fault of the other people who wouldn't agree to the one guy's request? And if it was, in fact, a waste of time to vote on his amendment as proposed because it wasn't going to pass and therefore nothing was going to happen, well, then, why not have that vote at 11:30 and show him that that he's wrong and you're right, and you knew what the outcome was going to be and he was just doing it for show, and then fine, he's had his vote and he gets out of your way, and at midnight you vote to keep the government open and everybody goes home happy. So I don't know. How do you determine who's at fault, which one is the chicken, which one is the egg, just as it was with the Dreamers and Democrats, right? Was it Republicans at fault because they refused to bend even a little bit in talking about something as important to a pretty sizable chunk of the Congress, including Republicans in some cases, as DACA? Or was it the fault of Democrats who used the only leverage they had to make themselves big and scary and important enough for you to listen for a moment and exercise the option to trigger a shutdown? Same situation, and we see it play out pretty much the same in the press, too. The more facile of the explanations is the one that prevails. We'll be back after this break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are cleaning up the mess this Friday morning of the last brief government shutdown. Of course, we're able to do that on a Friday. Thank you very much for moving the shutdown deadline to a Thursday so that we could discuss a shutdown in progress, or in this case, reversed very shortly after it began, on a Friday. Normally, we have to wait until Monday to pick up on these things. Still no answer for the many people who have questioned, both I've seen Joan McCarter and Josh Barrow, too, for whatever reason, decided to chime in on this one. Still no answer for why they can't simply set the deadline for, let's say, noon or 6 p.m., rather than stay up all night. But I guess everybody loves midnight, and there's something about it. Counting down. Apparently, even the reporters in the press gallery, counting down New Year's Eve style to the shutdown last night. Everybody enjoying their time there at the Capitol, enjoying their time complaining about being at the Capitol so late. I don't know, sort of a tradition, I guess. Let's see, where were we? Oh, yes, well, we were going to finish up with the first of the Bloomberg pieces written by Sahil Kapoor, who was there and exhausted himself last night, all in pursuit of the best way to clearly describe the fact that nothing in particular just happened. So, what have we got? Yes, we had left off with Rand Paul strategist Doug Stafford saying, hey, look, the guy just wanted to vote on an amendment to preserve current spending levels, and he deserved the vote, and he used the only tool at his disposal when he was angered by his snubbing. This could have been all avoided hours ago That's the way it came out. This could have all been avoided. There we are, hours ago. If the Senate ran like everyone there had rights and a voice. Okay. He wanted a debate and a vote on something important, Stafford said. That's apparently so outrageous that the Senate leadership would rather go past midnight than allow a senator his voice and a vote. And he's got a point, of course, except he's not interested when the voice that someone wants to have belongs to someone else other than him. It's very rare that he'll stand up and say, yeah, it really is an irritant for me, despite the fact that I'm happy, to organize with and caucus with Republicans, conference, I guess, in their case, with Republicans, and I'm going to stay a Republican in the face of all the embarrassment that Donald Trump is handing us. But if a Democrat wants to have that voice and vote, I'm not that interested in it. And really, probably even another Republican. Not so interesting to me. So, there's a little bit of hypocrisy right there. Next time somebody can stand up and highlight his hypocrisy and shut down the government over that. Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, in office a little more than a year, defended Paul, though, saying the issue of adding to the deficit is an important one that will need to be addressed. And it is. I actually thought tonight was one of our better nights. Democracy is messy, Kennedy said. This was some of the best debate I've heard. Well, I didn't hear any of it, and that's too bad because, I wish I had heard the best that John Kennedy of Louisiana, whoever that may be, actually heard. But, he's actually right, and he probably comes down about where I come down on a lot of these things. It is an important issue, and we should be discussing it. And one senator who wants to have it discussed, that's the point of having one of these senates, the way we set it up. That if one senator thinks it's important enough, he can create problems like that. It becomes an issue if you ever get yourself a really Looney Tunes senator, and we have had them, and we're seeing now on a grand scale how many stupid problems you can have if you have a Looney Tunes president. We always sort of assumed we wouldn't have either one, although I'm sure we thought it was a greater risk that we might have a Looney Tunes senator one day, and because we have had them, for instance, Joe McCarthy, and you can bring the government to its knees by being a loon. Well, obviously, the president can do the same. We have more frequently Looney Tunes members of the House. It's just more difficult for them to bring the place to a stop. Okay. I mentioned also that we had one other Bloomberg entry in this explanation bonanza that we're being offered. Sahil Kapoor lead on this one, but Billy House and Eric Wasson, they're auto-playing video. Thanks very much. Always love to have that in the background. Didn't have it in the last one. Trump signs delayed budget deal ending hours-long shutdown. Hours long. True. 2-year plan boosts federal spending, of course, as you know, by almost $300 billion. Congress approved budget measure after brief funding lapse. Now let's get to the details and see if we can't understand this thing a little bit better. President Donald Trump signed a 2-year budget agreement that will boost federal spending by almost $300 billion and suspend the debt ceiling for a year. We didn't mention that. Ending a brief partial government shutdown that began at midnight when lawmakers missed a funding deadline. Okay, we know all about that part. But yeah, suspending the debt ceiling for a year. They're going to run into, of course, the debt ceiling, or they were going to run into it sometime in March, almost coincidental with the next expected shutdown, if they can't get their act together between now and the next time they need to do this, as Joan has pointed out. But I guess if you suspend the debt ceiling, not raise the debt ceiling, but suspend the debt ceiling, that's interesting. Well, then you won't have that problem. I don't think that's the usual option, but interestingly, I guess some more hypocrisy that they might point out. I didn't hear any. I didn't listen, of course, to what Rand Paul was saying, but does he have any gripes about suspending the debt ceiling? That's a good question. Congress passed the measure before dawn on Friday. I don't know who Dawn was, but she should have gone home and not stayed there and showboated to have the Congress pass this measure before her, but whatever. They went ahead and did this. The 240 to 186 House vote overcame opposition from many Democrats and a faction of GOP conservatives. The Senate passed the bill earlier on Friday, 71-28. And I guess if they had significant opposition from Republicans and opposition from many, but not all Democrats, then that'll mean that there are some Democrats who went along with it in the House and voted for it. And I guess we'll see who they are and why they did it and talk about that either later on today, or maybe it won't even be shoehorned in until Monday, or maybe we don't care. Maybe it's just the usual suspects. Without more Republicans in Congress, we were forced to increase spending, listen to this, on things we do not like or want in order to finally, after many years of depletion, take care of our military, which he capitalized. Trump tweeted. Is that just this morning? Without more Republicans in Congress, we were forced to increase spending on things. It's not enough that they control the place. We were forced to increase spending. By who? By who? We don't even know. Of course, he blames Democrats for it. That's what he's supposed to say. Why didn't he just come out and say it? I don't know. But yeah, so there we are. We are forced to increase spending on things we do not like or want in order to finally, after many years of depletion, take care of our military. Oh, boy. All right, the drama played out against the backdrop of tumbling global stock markets. Also not my fault. Obama, by the way. The benchmark S&P 500 index fell 3.75% on Thursday, down more than 10% since its January 26th peak. The slump in worldwide equities kept its momentum Friday, with European and Asian markets dropping and U.S. futures reversing gains. Of course, stock markets open by now. Someone tell me what's happening. The budget accord got delayed in the Senate past the midnight deadline despite a strong endorsement from Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, which is also where Rand Paul represents, apparently, and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer of New York, and backing from Trump. Wow. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky protesting the huge spending increases, that are central to the deal, delayed action for most of Thursday by demanding a vote on an amendment to keep existing budget limits in place. If you were against President Obama's deficits, and now you're for the Republican deficits, isn't that the very definition of hypocrisy? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Only just one question mark, but you could feel that he wanted to add more. Are we to be conservative all the time, or only when they're in the minority? Well, I don't know. It's a good question. Are we to be concerned with every senator having a voice and a vote, or just you? Objection to increased domestic spending was also raised, or objections were raised, by a group of Republican conservatives in the House. Yeah, right. They're just a bunch of yahoos. Representative Mark Meadows of North Carolina, chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, called the deal fiscally irresponsible. What? I can't believe it. Well, of course, there's some truth to that, or at least according to the definition that these guys used to use under President Obama, and really every Democratic president. What's really happening here, of course, is we're seeing in action the reality of the way the two parties govern. Republicans have everybody convinced, for whatever reason, that they're the party of fiscal responsibility, and Democrats are tax and spend liberals. And time again, it is Republicans, when in control, who explode the debt and explode the deficit year to year, and Democrats who feel the pressure of this and who come into office promising to fix it because, of course, Republicans have been screaming about it for so long. When there's a Democratic president, they yell about it, and Democrats in Congress feel like, oh, this must be a serious problem, even though, well, I mean, say according to things like modern monetary theory, as we've learned here on the show, it isn't a problem. It's not an issue, and deficits don't matter. In that sense, Dick Cheney was briefly right about something. But Republicans are so respected in this town that it would damage. It's an old Simpsons reference. You remember that one where what was it? Was it guy voiced by John Lovitz too? Right, Artie, the smart guy from high school, the flashback episode. And you know what? That was a sexual harassment episode too. I think we didn't recognize it as such, or very few of us recognized it as such at the time. But you remember that he hopes that Marge won't tell anybody about my busy hands, as he said it. Not for me, not so much for me, but because I am so respected that it would damage the town to hear it. Where was I? Okay. So yes, I had a point with all of that, and now I can't remember what it was. It doesn't matter. The Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, yeah, right, analyzing a report from the Congressional Budget Office, boo, a bunch of hacks, fake news, said the deal would add a net $320 billion to deficits over a decade, an extra $20 billion that they forgot about, or $418 billion counting the additional interest costs. And don't you think you ought to count those? That's in addition to the estimated $1 trillion added to the deficit over a decade by the Republican tax cut legislation passed in December. And that did that get rounded down? I thought it was always 1.5 trillion when I was watching. It's 1 trillion now. So 300 billion we're adding now. Well, it's 320 billion. Well, it's 418 billion. But we added a trillion and a half, just a few months ago. Okay, well, a trillion. The numbers games we play here. All right. On the other side, House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi called the agreement a good bill, but said she would vote against it because House Speaker Paul Ryan refused to promise an open debate and vote on immigration legislation. Many Democrats lined up behind Pelosi, with 119 voting against the measure and 73 voting in favor. That's a rather close division. Ryan has promised to bring up an immigration bill, quote, that the president will sign, which fell short of demands from Democrats. In other words, I'll bring up a bill that the president will sign, meaning I'll bring up a bill that does nothing because the president doesn't want anything to happen and he won't sign a bill that does anything good. That's not a commitment, Pelosi said on the House floor. Representative Luis Gutierrez, an Illinois Democrat, urged his party to kill the spending bill unless it also protected young immigrants who were brought to the U.S. illegally as children and have been shielded under the soon-to-end Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. He said that if the legislation passed, all the leverage is gone to force a solution for the young immigrants. Now, Ryan's pitch on this thing comes up. Ryan made a public pitch for votes on Thursday, emphasizing the increased funding for the Pentagon to assuage the concerns of Republicans who said they would vote no because the plan also raised spending on domestic programs. I'll give you an idea of the weirdo priorities of these guys. I want to increase the caps. Joan has explained it before. They wanted to increase the sequestration-imposed caps on spending on the military and nothing else, and leave the caps in place on everything else we spend money on, domestic spending and every other aspect. Democrats said, well, we have priorities here too, and Rand Paul wants everybody to have a voice and a vote, so we have some priorities, and they even agreed to raising the caps on domestic spending only by a fraction of what they were agreeing to raise it on with respect to military spending. And this was still too annoying. That's the House conservative stance. I'm okay busting the sequestration caps on military, but I won't do it at all. I want zero increase for every other kind of spending. Well, that's fine in your district, but there are other districts in the country. And sometimes you're just basically going to have to compromise on things like that. Neither side got everything it wanted in this agreement, but we reached a bipartisan compromise that puts the safety and well-being of the American people first, Ryan said in a statement after the measure passed. Prior to the Senate adjourning just before 2 a.m., McConnell set up a procedural vote for Monday on shell legislation. That would again be picking up a House-passed vehicle and stripping it of its contents and replacing it with one substitute amendment. Set up a procedural vote for Monday on shell legislation that will be used as the vehicle for the chamber's debate on immigration. That was a key part of his agreement with Schumer that ended the last shutdown and led to the budget deal. The budget measure, H.R. 1892, will temporarily finance the government at current levels through March 23rd, while lawmakers fill in the details on longer-term spending, which includes raising the caps on defense spending by $80 billion over current law in this fiscal year, and $85 billion in the one that begins on October 1st. That would be fiscal year 2019. Non-defense spending will rise by $63 billion this year and $68 billion next year. It's filled with long-stalled or long-sought priorities for both sides. Republican defense hawks get more funds for the military, while Democrats get extra money for domestic priorities like combating opioid addiction, which is supposed to be a Republican priority, but apparently is not. The National Institutes of Health, budget, and community health centers. So health, and health. But by the way, once again, doing the right thing and all, but it is, I think, of some interest, and we ought to note that in this particular fight where Republicans demanded additional money on top of all that we're spending for the military and only begrudgingly agreed, and you see Donald Trump's tweet angry that they even had to agree to spending that they didn't want. Take note of that. Spending we don't even want in order to help our depleted military. What was the spending that Democrats spent one of their chits on? The opioid epidemic, which was supposed to be the Trump priority. I'm going to fix. Oh, and this isn't what he thought only I could fix. Although that would have been a good line too. Only I appear to be addicted to opioids, but am not. But I understand the feeling, and I can fix it. I alone can fix that too. But this was his responsibility, and he has failed miserably in addressing it. I mean, if we ever actually went into that story, we've skipped a whole lot of details about this, but I mean, how long has he been saying he was going to do something about it? It was supposed to be a number one priority. It's a huge problem in Trump voting districts, but he's got nothing on it. And he named somebody's going to be a czar, and then they didn't do anything, and they didn't convene any meetings, and then he said somebody else was going to be in charge of it, and somebody else, and now we've landed on Kellyanne Conway, apparently, in one of the latest stories, something I actually have in pocket. I don't know, we'll have to dig it out and put it in the queue so you can have it to read it, but apparently at some point in her so-called oversight of the opioid cabinet, I think is how they referred to it in this story. She's cut out the actual like drug czars and the people who know what they're talking about, and is running the show herself. But to what avail? I have no idea, because there's still no opioid epidemic. Nothing that addresses how the administration hopes to approach this stuff. And it's been such a mess, but it's such a huge problem for real people and killing them out there. Democrats can't stand idly by and watch people, even Trump voters and their relatives, drop dead from opioid overdose and not do something, even though he promised he was going to do it. It ends up that Democrats, one, clean up the mess, and two, use one of their chits in all of this on opioids, when this should really be squarely at President Trump's feet. But the sad news is he doesn't give a crap one way or the other. He could care less. Those people are garbage to him, and he's got no interest in helping them. And really, honestly, they're pretty much garbage to the rest of us too in terms of the politics of it, but they're people, and so Democrats do something. And it will avail them nothing, but there it is. Just like with the actual, those of us who actually address issues of rampant government spending, whatever that might mean, or debt and deficit, though they don't appear to actually matter for anything, it's the Democrats who always end up cleaning things up, and to the detriment of the programs that they prefer, by the way. And once again, doing it again here. I'm sure there's stuff we would rather have spent money on, other than cleaning up an opioid mess that somebody else said they were going to make a priority, and then they were just too stupid and lazy to do it. So fine, we'll help people again. And there we are. And that's only going to make tensions worse among our own coalition who say, well, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you leverage, why use one of the chits for the opioid epidemic when you could have been using it for DACA? And I don't know. And I guess the answer is they're not on the other side, and Republicans interested in helping on DACA. They said they were, and you'd think you might be able to embarrass them into living up to their rhetoric. But the reality is they don't really care about helping those people. And I don't think they even really care about the helping with the opioid epidemic. But apparently some of their voters in some of those districts really believed that they were going to do something. And they might have felt some pressure to get bailed out on that. And so they agreed. So what else is in here? The agreement also repeals a piece of Obamacare. Yay, that sounds like a good thing for us to be helping with. All right, well, is it one of the worst ones? One that even Democrats don't like very much? A Medicare cost-cutting board aimed at ensuring the program's long-term solvency. Oh, that's just great. So one of the pieces of Obamacare that we repealed is a Medicare cost-cutting board that would help ensure the program's long-term solvency. Oh, well. And it provides $90 billion in disaster assistance, and this is key, for California, Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, gets like 15 cents, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which gets 8 cents, I'm sure. I say it became important because they ended up getting a lot of votes from people who are represent disaster-prone states, I think one report put it, but basically people who have racked up huge expenses and want cash from the federal government to help recover. The bill authorizes the sale of 100 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Oil Reserve, which is not usually a wise move, to pay for some of the new spending. Really? And raises customs and airport security fees in the next decade. It also renews a number of expired tax breaks for calendar 2017, including for cellulosic biofuel. Hooray. While extending a nuclear power tax credit that was scheduled to expire so that it will be available after 2020. Not very exciting on that one. But you know what? Make a little note here. 100 million barrels from the Strategic Oil Reserve being sold. Normally not done because strategic, right? So not smart to just dump it for bookkeeping purposes. But I say of note because at some point you're going to want to replace the oil in the Strategic Oil Reserve because it's supposed to be strategic. That is, we're supposed to have it available in case of emergency, any number of imaginable emergencies. Well, what do you think we're going to do for replacing the oil? It's a Strategic Oil Reserve. Of course, there'll be a clamor for, well, now we got to build the Keystone XL pipeline and make sure that we can extract more oil from Canadian tar sands or whatever, and we've got to be doing more high-risk, high-pollution drilling in order to replace the 100 million barrels that we sold. Or we, of course, could go and on the market and buy it off of OPEC. Or maybe, just maybe, some of the newfound oil being extracted from the Russian Arctic might find its way. Wouldn't that be something if we were refilling the Strategic Oil Reserve from Russia and doing so by paying off, I don't know, let's say, oligarchs who are good friends of Vladimir Putin's. I don't know why that might happen or why that thought occurred to me, but, well, gee whiz, I guess anything can happen. All right, well, let's see. Moving on, there are a couple of other things that I have in pocket and a few other ideas I have for the filling the time, such as it is in our second half of the show. Let's see. I scrolled down a little bit to see if I could find the Kellyanne Conway thing before I forgot that I wanted to do that. But I'll have to make a note to myself. This is one of those things in post-production when I say to myself, wasn't I supposed to... I said during the show I'm going to dig up this piece and include it in the roundup, and then I can't remember what it was. I have to go back and listen to the show just to find out what it was. I don't know where I said it. What time was it when I did it? So, note to self. We want to dig that one up. Let's see. There's a couple other. Is there another piece on the shutdown? Oh, yes. There was one observation that I wanted to pass along. I guess triggered in my mind by hearing Luis Gutierrez complain, rightly. It's a loaded word, complain, but he's right to complain about it. That the bill passed last night that will reopen the government and includes the 2-year budget agreement on top of all of that, or excludes a DACA fix, and that the leverage is gone. And the leverage may be gone, although we'll be back in shutdown town sometime in March, and we could try that again. And we'll see whether Luis Gutierrez thinks it's a good idea to marry the two issues there together. But Ed O'Keefe from the Washington Post noting via Twitter last night, one thing about the House vote tally, once again, the Hispanic caucus did not vote as a bloc. Despite months of opposition to spending bills that don't address Dreamers, 7 of its members voted yes. They, and here's where the disaster issue comes up, they are from disaster-prone states, California, Florida, and Texas. So, yes, that would be a fairly significant chunk of our Hispanic caucus there. Not all of the members from those states did it, but they are apparently those in need of bringing home federal disaster relief bacon to their districts, more so than they are in logging what would now, in fact, be a useless vote as DACA protest. The bill was destined to pass, and they could vote no, but then they would presumably at some point be held to account for voting no on much-needed disaster relief funding for their districts instead. Horse trading goes on everywhere, and it's worth noting that the Hispanic caucus didn't approach it unanimously united on one side or another. But then again, you do notice that the only discussion of any Hispanic members at all was the Luis Gutierrez complaint that we were abandoning DACA. Well, more after this. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just our 1-minute break at the top of the hour. I am unable to dig up in pocket the story of Kellyanne Conway and her opioid cabinet, which I thought was an unusual way to willingly refer to the group you're working with. The opioid cabinet, it sounds like they're all, of course, addicted to opioids, and that's not the case. Surely no more than 3/4 of them addicted to opioids at this point. And maybe it was just something that I saw noted in the news at some point and didn't put aside. Opioids, not a huge topic here on the show, but I'm sure we can. I've made my note to myself. We'll see if we can't dig this thing up. There was at least one other side note on the spectacle last night, including this from Stephen Dennis, another Bloomberg reporter, but one who follows procedure on the Hill and budget issues sometimes, in particular with particularly close scrutiny. He tweeting last night, here's an irony for us. Irony, if the balanced budget amendment had passed way back when congressional Republicans like Mick, as he says, Mick the Knife Mulvaney, were demanding it, back during the old cut, cap, and balance days, if that had passed, it would be kicking in right about now, where, of course, at which point we are agreeing to bust spending caps and do another $300 billion in deficit-funded spending, $320 billion in deficit spending, and the Constitution would have prohibited it. But that was the only way we could engineer a way out of a government shutdown and waive the upcoming debt ceiling on top of all of that. So interesting, and I guess you could call it irony. It's hypocrisy. It's just short-term stupidity. It's gimmitarianism. Whatever wedge issue I can develop right now that will make the other people look bad, I don't care if it meddles with the Constitution. That should have been an early warning for all of us about how far these idiots were willing to go to preserve a political issue. that they were willing to meddle with the Constitution in a way that would have left us completely dead in the water last night for short-term political gain. Knowing, I think, at the time, even when they proposed it, that this thing was never going to pass, and so it was a freebie vote to look like a deficit hawk, when in fact you weren't. It was going to be useless. It was as useless a protest as Rand Paul's protest last night. So there we go. Let's see. You know what? I think at this point, I think we've summed up the happenings pretty well. And I don't know that we need to go any further into it than that. And we can probably turn our attention elsewhere. You know what would be a good way to gather our thoughts is, I guess, this is as good a time as any to consider this thing. In the face of all of these accusations of hypocrisy about different ways of blowing up the admittedly stupid sequestration caps and deficit spending, and you're a deficit hawk, no, you're a deficit peacock. We got this submission. Our friend and listener and sometimes contributor Darwin Darko, becoming a sometime contributor again, sent off a piece on the Trump parade, the big Trump military parade, expected to cost millions and maybe even incur or inflict millions of dollars worth of damage to the streets of Washington, D.C., all in the name of, I guess, Trump's ego. Well, we know all about that, but he's sent us a report and some commentary on it based on his reading, and I guess he mentions in the beginning of the recording that he is reporting from overseas. Are you deployed? I know you have a military connection, and are you reserve? Is that what it is? But at any rate, are you overseas for being deployed? I guess is the bigger question. And the fact that you're reading to us from Stars and Stripes suggests to me that you are on overseas deployment. It's a Washington Post report, but reprinted in Stars and Stripes about the military parade plans, and that's got to be pretty interesting to be reading about in Stars and Stripes overseas. We've heard reaction from everywhere, from rank and file to retired generals saying, no, this is actually a stupid thing. We don't do that in this country. And it is not only a waste of time and money, but I mean, it's kind of just an annoyance for a lot of us. I mean, everyone likes to honor the military, and a parade isn't out of the question. But, well, for one thing, through the streets of D.C. is one issue. For another, you could wait for Veterans Day and make a big deal there. Or you could have an event in Arlington National Cemetery. There's some veterans there in need of some recognition, or veterans who are living homeless on the streets who are in need of some recognition. But anyway, I thought I would take this time now at the top of the hour, with plenty of time, to run Darwin's piece here, and we can listen to his reflections on this oddball of an issue as he reads it to us from Stars and Stripes. Why don't we do that?
Hello, David.
Hello.
Darwin Darko, reporting from overseas this time. And I have a little something from the perspective of those of us in the military. Well, not necessarily the perspective of us, but I find that a lot of the folks that I talk to kind of agree with this article. But this was written in the Washington Post by Greg Jaffe and Philip Rucker. Jaffe, Jaffe. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Anyways, the name of the publication is Stars and Stripes. And I'll go ahead and get started. And I'm also reading from like a physical newspaper, so I know that sound may be foreign to a lot of our younger listeners. But it's titled Trump's Marching Orders, Planned Military Parade. President Donald Trump's vision of soldiers marching and tanks rolling down the boulevards of Washington is moving closer to reality in the Pentagon and White House, where officials say they have begun to plan a grand military parade this year showcasing the might of America's armed forces. Trump has long mused publicly and privately about wanting such a parade, but a January 18th meeting between Trump and top generals in the Pentagon tanked. A room reserved for top secret discussions marked a tipping point. According to two officials briefed on the planning, surrounded by military's highest ranking officials, including Defense Secretary Jim Mattis and Joint Chief Chairman General Joe Dunford, Trump's seemingly abstract desire for a parade was suddenly heard as a presidential directive, the officials said. The marching orders were, "I want a parade like the one in France," said an official who spoke on the condition of anonymity because the planning discussions are supposed to remain confidential. This is being worked at the highest levels of the military. I'll flip a few pages because paper. And it continues. American shows of military force don't come cheap. The cost of shipping Abrams tanks and high-tech hardware to Washington could run in the millions. And military officials said it was unclear how they could pay for it. A White House official familiar with the planning described the discussion as brainstorming and said nothing is settled. Right now, there's nothing, no meat on the bones, said the official who spoke on the condition of anonymity. This is another guy speaking in anonymity. Nobody wants to even fess up here. Speaking on the condition of anonymity to describe internal discussions. Still, the official said Trump is determined to have a parade. The president wants to do something that highlights the service and sacrifice of the military and have a unifying moment for the country. What? No one in the military wants to do this. What are you talking about? It's service and sacrifice of the military. And so you're going to waste all this money on this dumb parade when you could, maybe give the VA more funding, perhaps go from city to city, finding homeless vets and giving them housing, giving the ones that are serving currently a pay raise. This is stupid. Let me skip down. This is a pretty long article. I'll skip down a little bit. Aboard Air Force One en route home from Paris last July, aides said Trump told them he was dazzled by the French display, and he said he wanted one at home. It was still on his mind 2 months later when he met with Macron on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. It was one of the greatest parades I've ever seen, Trump told reporters. It was 2 hours on the button, and it was military might. And I think a tremendous thing for France and for the spirit of France. All things you can learn from France. This is what you want to take from France. Okay, good. Seated next to Macron, Trump added, "We're going to have to try to top it." A date has not been selected, although officials said Trump would like to tie the parade to a patriotic holiday. Officials are weighing whether patterns as well as competing events such as the massive annual Independence Day celebration on the Mall. Trump officials had discussed Memorial Day, for example, maybe July 4th, but the Pentagon prefers Veterans Day on November 11th, in part because it would coincide with the 100th anniversary of the victorious end of the World War I, and therefore be less associated with the president and politics. That's what everyone is hoping, said the military official. Okay, let me weigh in for a second. It's like everything this guy does, everybody else is left with finding some justification in a post hoc way of reasoning his I don't want to talk. I don't want to sound like I'm downing people with, Alzheimer's or, that are becoming more and more mentally challenged as they get older. But this is how many examples of this are we going to have? So after the fact, you guys are coming up with these justifications. Suddenly the Pentagon is favoring a particular, a specific day just to acquiesce to this guy. Okay. All right. I'll skip down a little further. More and more I read, the more upset I get. Sorry about that. Even before he was sworn in as president, Trump was dreaming of America's war machine, on display for the country and the world in front of the White House or Capitol. We're going to show the people as we build up our military. I don't have a good Trump accent, so sorry about that quote there. We're going to have to show the people as we build up our military. I don't know. Trump said in an interview with the Washington Post before his inauguration. That military may come marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. That military may be flying over New York City and Washington, D.C. for parades. I mean, we're going to be showing our military. But big military parades, even those launched with the best of intentions, carry some risk and troublesome historic echoes. With a few exemptions, such as former President George H.W. 1991 parade down Constitution Avenue celebrating the victory of the Persian War. Presidents have avoided displays of military hardware that are more associated in the American mind with the Soviet Union's Red Square. Celebrations, or perhaps North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's efforts to show off his new missiles? I don't think there's a lack of love and respect for our armed forces in the United States, said Douglas Brinkley, a presidential historian at Rice University. What are they going to do? Stand there while Donald Trump waves at them? It smacks of something you see in a totalitarian country, unless there's a genuine, earnest reason to do it. I feel that's kind of how he said it. I agreed. Weaponry on the streets of Washington is not unheard of. I mean, President Harry Truman and President JFK had military equipment during their inaugural parades in 1949 and 1963, respectively. During key junctures in the Cold War, for example, said Michael Beschloss, another presidential historian, set again the backdrop of American history. It does seem to hark back to the harsh days of the Cold War, Beschloss said. Those parades were a counterpoint to the parades in front of Lenin's tomb at Red Square. One reason the Soviets had those parades was to distract the world from the fact that the Soviet military was actually much weaker than the Soviets were claiming. But generally, the United States has shied away from parading its military assets, calculating that doing so was not necessary for the world's preeminent superpower. Yeah, and I'll add, you paraded them across Iraq and Afghanistan for 15, 17 years? I think they know. They realize. Skipping down a little further, a parade would likely be interpreted as another strike of nuclear gamesmanship. Tensions between North Korea and the United States have risen over the past year as Trump and Kim have taunted each other with playground nicknames and threats. Then there are the domestic pitfalls. At a time when Mattis and his top generals have been complaining about the state of the military readiness and lobbying Congress for more money, pulling equipment offline for a costly parade would send the wrong signal. With the midterm elections approaching and Trump's approval rating at historic lows, the lure of honoring the troops, yeah, it's powerful. Quote, who flipped the coin for the Super Bowl on Sunday? Asked Peter Feaver, a former Bush White House official and professor at Duke University. It was Medal of Honor winners. Why? The military brings us together. But Feaver also issued a warning for Trump, who is known for his excesses. A military parade, he said, is the kind of thing that can easily be overdone. I feel it kind of ended with a whimper there in the article, but you guys get the point. We over here, at least us in Japan, this isn't necessary. There's a lot more pressing issues going on that need to be addressed, and to take time out and resources and funding. This tax bill just passed. It's wasting a ton of money. This new bill is going to pass. It's going to blow a hole through the debt. This is the most wasteful kind of spending. It's kind of like, I don't know, gilded name plaque on a building, for example. Just randomly pulling something out of the air. Anyways, hope everybody doing great back in the States. I should be back whenever this thing is over. Looking forward to being back in the States. And hearing more of your episodes, David. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Darwin. Don't give away any operational secrets there. You don't have to tell us when your deployment is going to be over, but thanks for answering the question. Good points there. And by the way, I particularly enjoyed the point about you don't need to parade your military down Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C., because you've paraded it across Iraq and Afghanistan for the past 15 years. Quite true. And, also, of course, pretty much out of keeping with our military and, our tradition of civilian control of the military. And although there have been pieces of military equipment or military units used in parades before, what he's really proposing is more in line with the way they do things in the old Soviet Union and in North Korea, and I guess in other military dictatorships as well. So, all right. Well, I think we're all in agreement with that. And it's certainly of interest. Thank you for sending it to us and for giving us your unique perspective on it. And I think, I guess it's not that unique. We all agree with you, but it's unique in the sense that you are, of course, a member of the current active duty military and deployed at the moment. So enjoy the trip to Japan. Hopefully, we don't trigger any nuclear strikes on the country while you're there, or even afterwards. Frankly, I'd like to keep the nuclear weapons off of Japan from here on in, to the extent that we're capable of doing so. Okay, many other stories. I did find, finally, the Kellyanne Conway opioid cabinet story in Politico. So I'll just include it for those of you interested in catching up on that subject. There's so many more things here. I think maybe we might need to run through headlines and suggestions that have come in, touching on a few things just as headlines and moving on, and a few things that we can read a little further into. Among those ideas and stories suggested so far today and going back a few days, Karen sends us from San Francisco her this Reuters top news tweet. Sounds very interesting. We ought to look into for this one. Exclusive. Reuters is the only one reporting this. U.S. gunmaker Remington seeks financing to file for bankruptcy, according to sources. What does that mean exactly? I understand the filing for bankruptcy. Financing to file, like they're so bankrupt. How bankrupt are they? We're so bankrupt. They're so bankrupt over here that they need financing just to file for bankruptcy. I need canned laughter for this show. Just sort of interested in checking this one out. By the way, did you know what they call themselves? Remington Outdoor Company Incorporated. Remington Outdoors. We're outdoorsy. We make guns. They get fired all over the place, indoors, outdoors. But why don't they just call themselves? Well, why not call themselves the Remington Handheld Instant Death Machine Company? That they don't do. Remington Firearms, whatever. But they're so much more than just firearms. Though they are one of the largest U.S. makers of firearms. And firearms is supposed to be a great place to make money because every once in a while people panic and go out and just buy as many as they can. And yet here they are filing for bankruptcy. Well, interesting. They've reached out to banks and credit investment funds in search of financing that will allow it to file for bankruptcy. People familiar with the matter said on Thursday, of course, there's many kinds of bankruptcy, including ones that would be reorganization and with an eye towards emerging from bankruptcy rather than dissolving the company. So I could see where they might actually entice people into funding some of that in exchange for a big chunk of the money once they come out. And it's hard to imagine going out of business selling guns in this country. But it is worth pointing out that although gun sales every once in a while tend to skyrocket, we do see stats that lead us to believe that a smaller and smaller slice of the American population is buying up bigger and bigger chunks of the guns. And although, a run on sales is always good, at least short term, for the bottom line of gun makers, long term, the story may be very different. Well, okay, let's see. Any other interesting... Well, there's a little bit of additional finance news in that one. The move comes as Remington reached a forbearance agreement with its creditors this week following a missed coupon payment on its debt. The sources said the company has been working with investment bank Lazard Limited on options to restructure its $950 million debt pile. Reuters reported last month. That does call things into question. I mean, if they're... $950, $950. That's all they owe. $950 million in debt as it is. And it missed a payment on that current debt and got a forbearance agreement. And then they're looking for financing to go into bankruptcy. That does raise some serious questions about their ability to, profit in the future and whether or not guns is a place you really want to be investing. And anyway, it's an interesting article. I'll let you take a look at it offline so that we can get to a couple of other suggested topics as well. Let's see. I have a must read. Everyone, where's my must read music? That's the only music I have. I mean, otherwise, what do I do? Where's my must read music? No, that doesn't sound like it's going to help us. Do I have anything else for that? Must read? Yes, Armando has just stopped the car in order to read this, and it is copied to Armando as well. Let's see. This is the must read the tweet from Norm Eisen or the underlying subject of the tweet? Let's see. Must read from, it's Norm Eisen saying that there's a must read from Walter Schaub, raising profound and, in my view, correct concerns about Trump World's new legal defense and slush fund. That could be interesting. Imagine if the Watergate gang had one of these. They could have hung on for years longer. Or imagine if Obama had one. It would have been treason, and we would have impeached him. I don't know, whatever. Okay, Walter Schaub tweeting, here's my op-ed on the shockingly permissive legal defense fund that Trump's hand-picked acting OGE director, remember he's no longer the head of OGE, Walter Schaub having resigned rather than handle this mess, that the hand-picked acting OGE director blessed last week. LA Times, this is the link for this op-ed. Let's take a look. Trump's ethics office has blessed an unethical legal defense fund for the president's associates. Let's see how much we can get through before our next break. Under cover of last week's feverish reaction to the FBI memorandum released by Representative Devin Nunes, the Office of Government Ethics recently, or rather quietly, dumped documents revealing a new low point in the agency's 40-year history. In a letter signed January 29th but withheld from public view until the memo frenzy was peaking, the agency's Trump-appointed acting director, David Apol, A-P-O-L, that's all. Nothing to go on there, blessed a shockingly permissive arrangement for funneling cash to White House appointees and others linked to Trump. Boy, they love funneling cash. The fund, which will reimburse legal fees stemming from the Russia investigations, represents a radical and dangerous departure from established practice for government employee legal defense funds. It's formulated under, of all things, an IRS designation for political organizations. Oh my. It's probably a bad place to park it. Even its name, the Patriot Legal Expense Fund Trust, echoes the tribal politics of our time. The name may suggest something more sinister still, that the cash is for patriots loyal to the president. Of course, you testify against me, screw you, you're not a patriot, can't have this money, it's for patriots. It says so right in the name. When the plan was set up, a fund was announced. The plan to set up a fund was announced. White House lawyer Ty Cobb told NBC that none of the money would go to, quote, indictees or current targets, unquote. That might mean the president is throwing the likes of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and Trump campaign consultant George Papadopoulos into the outer darkness. They have pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI and are cooperating with Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III. Thank you for giving us the whole name. And in fact, the fund's newly finalized charter does discourage payments to criminal defendants, but it also includes a convenient exception. The fund's manager has, quote, sole and absolute discretion, unquote, to determine that the defendant acted in good faith and without knowledge of any illegality. So that makes it sound like, no, they're not going to exclude them at all. Ty Cobb said that none of the money would go to indictees or current targets because that's what it would get him out of the NBC interview without being decapitated. Not that NBC was going to do that or ever would, likely, or even come close Like, for instance, just asking a follow-up question. Never mind chopping the guy's head off. That's not likely to happen either. But that's what he needed to do and say in order to get out of there unscathed. So he said it, knowing that later on they would just reverse themselves anyway. Other legal defense funds for government workers, for example, those set up for President Clinton's staffers when he was under investigation, have been structured as trusts for one employee at a time. In such trusts, the money collected can only be dispersed to that single beneficiary. It can't be used to favor or shun potential recipients based on what they may or may not reveal to investigators. Yeah, that sounds like a bad premise from which to be doing this, doesn't it? Let's discuss it a little bit more and some other stuff on the other side of our third and final break for today, heading into the home stretch of the Friday show here on Kagro in the Morning. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So much to get through. We're never going to make it all the way through, but let's take a dive back in. What tab was that in? My goodness, there's so much open here. Back into the story about the Patriot super awesome, totally legal defense fund for people who never did it in the first place, and this whole witch hunt anyway fund. We did mention that other legal funds for government workers usually set up for one person at a time, and this one is very unusual and gives the director of the fund the opportunity to hold the availability of reimbursement for your legal fees hostage pending, some indication, let's say, to the president himself that you aren't going to give him up in discussing the issue with prosecutors. And of course, if you swear you'll cover everything up, well, we'll cover your defense fees. If you won't swear loyalty to the president, you're on your own. So, like we said, not the usual case here with the Patriot Fund. Despite its name, it is not set up as a trust, but rather as a limited liability company. Oh, take note of that they call it a trust in order to reflect, I guess, the structure of previous funds of this nature. I mean, that was the name of it, right? The Patriot Legal Expense Fund Trust, but it is in fact the Patriot Legal Expense Fund Trust LLC. It is set up not as a trust, but as a limited liability company, and its funds can go to any of the White House staffers, campaign workers, or other Trump associates who get caught up in the Russia investigations. The fund's charter is largely silent as to the selection process, except to grant absolute power to the fund manager, who alone passes judgment on who is worthy or unworthy of support. Who is that manager, I wonder? An ingenious flourish on this unbounded control is language barring the manager from revealing publicly, or even to individual recipients, how the decisions are made. Wow. That bit of omerta shields the manager from scrutiny. One rule of the Patriot Fund, it seems, is you don't talk about the Patriot Fund. The 49-page charter is a lush garden of legal formalities that conceal the fund's minimal consideration of ethical safeguards. No firewall prevents the president from bending the manager's ear about who should or shouldn't receive the fund's largesse. Oh boy. Nor is the manager required to seek any guidance from ethics officials to determine if donations come from prohibited sources, like Russia. Pardon me. The Patriot Fund doesn't specifically bar gifts from a donor who verbally admits the donation is based on the potential recipient's official position. Only if the donor puts such a prohibited motive in writing would the money be refused. And See below. Perhaps not even then. The manager isn't required to individually screen each donor to check for ethical conflicts. Instead, the Patriot Fund relies mainly on an honor system. Oh boy. Donors complete online forms to self-certify that their gifts comply with the rules.
That is not how this works!
Yes, thank you. I figured I have a sound effect for that one, certainly. But boy. Among the things donors are asked to attest to is that they don't do business with and aren't regulated by federal agencies that could be influenced by a potential beneficiary of the fund. Well, I'm not. You're not? It says so right here on the form. I'm not, so don't look any further into this. The online form then helpfully lists 20 independent agencies, for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission, that it defines as exempt from this rule, because they're independent agencies. You see, if you have business before this SEC and an SEC commissioner, for whatever reason, were to find himself wrapped up in all of this, well, I guess it would be okay. Unfortunately, the White House staffers and other senior appointees regularly consult with and influence the SEC, in case you didn't know, and all the other agencies on the list. According to the charter, the Patriot Fund won't strictly refuse money from prohibited sources. Instead, it allows the manager to track bad and good donations separately. Money from prohibited sources would count only towards distributions to recipients outside the government who aren't subject to federal ethics rules. Wow, this is amazing. So in other words, if Donald Trump Jr. were implicated in all this, and he is, his legal fees could not only be paid by this Patriot Fund, but it could be paid using money that you would ordinarily be prohibited from even accepting in such a fund, because the funds could be used to defend government employees. In other words, if Russia just said, no, literally, the country of Russia, and on the country's behalf, Vladimir Putin were to say, I'll give you $1 billion, for instance. You could put it in the bad pile. They're going to keep a good pile and a bad pile. So the money from the bad pile doesn't go get commingled, supposedly. Now, how they're going to guarantee this, I have no idea. Money being fungible and all that. But supposedly none of that money would be available for use in defending people who occupy government positions. But people who don't occupy government positions, like Donald Trump Jr., who might nonetheless be important to Donald Trump Sr., can have their defense paid for entirely by Russia under this structure, and it's all A-OK. Because we've got a bad bucket, a deplorable bucket of money, and then regular good money that's only regular American bribes. He continues, of course, in describing this by starting out with, this is a shell game. For legal purposes, any bad money taints the whole fund because money is fungible. Every dollar the fund accepts from a questionable source and pays to a non-governmental beneficiary frees up a dollar for those who do work for the government. All the book cooking in the world can't remove the taint. Finally, the charter includes a provision authorizing distributions from the Patriot Fund to Trump's re-election campaign. This is unprecedented in my experience. Legal defense funds are not also campaign fundraising tools. And depending on the tax status of the Patriot Fund LLC, whether it's a partnership or a corporation, distinct election law rules either prohibit or limit direct campaign contributions. How exactly will the fund reconcile itself with these laws? That's a mystery. Government employee legal defense funds are not required to seek approval from the Office of Government Ethics. They do, however, they ask anyway, because the office's blessing conveys legitimacy in the eyes of the public, and it may even give pause to investigators later on. Acting Director Apol's decision to bless the bizarre charter of the Patriot Fund is a heartbreaking breach of applicable laws and the executive branch's ethical norms. Norms! They've been broken again. Amazing. And a good call on the part of all those who endeavored to bring it to our attention. Thank you very much for doing so. Scrolling back a little further here. Boy, Kate really coming through with a couple of good suggestions. Let's see. Some of them we will take perhaps in their entirety. Others we'll do headlines. What's headline number one? Robert McGuire tweeting this one. This is just like a bizarre sounding story. Robert McGuire says he tracks secret political money for Open Secrets DC. So that's good news. What is it that he's tweeting? Look at this story. Back to the military press here. AmericanMilitaryNews.com. Let's just open this up and see what the headline is. It's the same thing as was tweeted here. Man poses as Army Lieutenant General, goes to classified briefing, and orders helicopter ride. Wow. That sounds like fun, but a problem. Like, how can you really do that? I guess if you've got the uniform, you can do anything. Which, by the way, let me just use that as underpinning for my constant point that suits matter. Like, honestly, if you go on television in a suit, you can say anything you want, and they just will not call BS on you. This guy, how do I know that? One, I see it happen every day. Two, if you can walk into a secret meeting, a classified briefing, in uniform, claim you're a lieutenant general and get a helicopter ride, I guess you could do just about anything. You should not be surprised that you can go on TV in a suit and say, up is down, there is no global warming, left is right, always been at war with Eurasia, and Hillary Clinton was over-prepared for the presidency. And people will believe it. Christian Gerald Desgreux, I don't know how he would pronounce it, Desgrous. You're going to have to help me out, Frenchies. Impersonated an Army Lieutenant General. Why not go for why not pretend you're the Commander-in-Chief? I say, put on a wig and go in. A North Carolina man, Heartland America, I'm so sad, posing as a U.S. Army Lieutenant General, stolen valor, so sad, has been indicted by a federal grand jury. Bastards, everyone hates the federal government. After he went to a classified briefing and asserted authority to land a helicopter at a software company's headquarters in Cary, North Carolina, according to a news release. What a weird world we live in. Christian Gerald Desgreux, who knows, not even going to try, 57 years old, pretended to be a lieutenant general and engaged in transporting a person for a classified briefing, and under such guise, having asserted authority to land a helicopter at Statistical Analysis Systems, SAS headquarters, located in Cary, North Carolina, according to the release. I don't know, got into like cop babble speak there for a second. Statistical Analysis Systems, though, not Special Air Services, SAS. That, they probably would have spotted the fraud. Did he not come in uniform, or did he just walk in and say, hey, I'm wearing jeans, but I'm a lieutenant general, give me a helicopter? I'm really curious. The helicopter landing took place November 6, 2017. What a day. Desgreux could face up to 3 years in prison, that's it, and a $250,000 fine and a term of supervised release if imprisoned. That doesn't sound like too much. Maybe Ryan Zinke would like to use that for his helicopter rides instead. At the time of the incident, SAS security contacted local authorities who handled the situation. SAS spokeswoman Shannon Heath told WRAL, this was an isolated incident. He has, by the way, the defendant pending charges, including an alleged assault on a female from April 2017, misuse of the 911 system, and violating a domestic violence protection order. Gee whiz. That seems to turn up everywhere. From May 2017. Felony conversion in November 2017. He was very busy. And interfering with emergency communications. Felony fleeing to elude arrest. That seems unfair as a charge. Misuse of the 911 system, again. And misdemeanor stalking from December of 2017. He seems to do this all the time. Sounds like he's a career criminal, but not a very good career. This all according to state criminal records obtained by the News and Observer. So you shouldn't be able to have a gun and all that, much less a military helicopter. I'd love to find out more about how he impersonated a general, though, and whether did he buy himself a uniform and go through the whole thing, or did he just, I'd love to know. I mean, that'd be the most amazing thing in the world if you just walked in and said, hi, I'm a general. Now, I'm not even sure exactly how this went down. Did he landed a helicopter at SAS headquarters, and they were like, what the hell are you doing landing a helicopter here? You're under arrest. No, I'm a lieutenant general. And did it go that way? Or did he walk into some place and say, hi, I'm a general, give me a helicopter? Baffled by A, the fact that it happened, and B, the fact that you would report something that, intriguing and not tell us anything about it. All right. Well, anyway, I don't know. Hell of a story. Hell of a headline. Anyway, here's another hell of a headline, also from Kate Sherrill, sending this one on from Politico. Former Cato employees, the libertarian outfit, describe years of harassment because, man, you got to be free to harass, right? Well, of course, it's turning up everywhere. Should be no surprise that there's some going on at the Cato Institute as well. They're about as dude bro-ish as it can sometimes get. Libertarian leader and ex-Cato President Ed Crane repeatedly made inappropriate sexual comments, staffers say, but man, he needed to be free to do so. He's a 73-year-old dude bro, by the way. 3 former employees of the famed Cato Institute, famed, say they were sexually harassed by Ed Crane, the 73-year-old co-founder and president emeritus of the think tank and one of the most recognizable figures in the libertarian movement. Couldn't pick him out of a lineup of Ed Cranes if I was asked to, but okay. One former employee said Crane asked her to take off her bra. Another said, this is a morning show here. Another said he compared her breasts to pornographic images on his computer, I guess facilitated by the removal of the bra, but okay. A third said he sent her an email on breast augmentation. He's got very definite preferences, and he was just inspecting the place. Crane also settled an additional sexual harassment claim by a former employee in 2012. Her lawyer confirmed to Politico. I'm going to guess it involved breasts, but that's just, a rough outline of where this guy has spent his time, I guess. Okay. Crane, who served as president and CEO of the libertarian think tank for more than 30 years before becoming president emeritus after a dispute with Cato shareholders Charles and David Koch, who don't even care about breasts at all, I guess, denied several of the incidents or said he didn't recall them because, I'm 73, I don't remember. Before ending a brief interview, he declined to comment on whether he was involved in a legal settlement in 2012. Peter Gettler, who served as Cato's president and CEO since 2015 and doesn't even like breasts at all, probably, I don't know, also declined to comment on specific incidents of alleged sexual harassment during Crane's tenure at Cato. James Davis, a spokesperson for the Koch brothers, said they found out about the 2012 sexual harassment settlement in the midst of their dispute with Crane at a time when they were already seeking to remove him as president. I don't know. Do we go on with this? Crane likes to talk about boobs, and it got him in trouble. Terrific. Is there some more detail here? Nah, not really. I don't know. But we'll just put it out there as just this exists everywhere. And it's infuriating everywhere, and it's good to have on record, at the very least. Plus, it got us a couple of laughs talking about that this guy is so breast-obsessed. And, all right. So, moving on here. Let's see. Other tabs that we have open that we need to check in on. There's a lot of it now, and I want to make sure we don't miss anything. Yes. Oh, speaking of over-prepared Hillary Clinton, as I mentioned a while back, just a few minutes back, saw a couple of tweets with respect to, I guess, a new story out on Trump being a dotard, basically, is what we're getting at. Lachlan Markay has this, or tweeted this story out from the Washington Post, along with the comment, remember, Trump no longer reads intelligence reports and prefers to have top-line points read to him. Remember, of course, Michael Barbaro noting here, this is very important and in keeping with what those who have biographied Trump all find, he's not a reader. And, of course, lots of other people tweeting out, remember, by the way, that this was back in the campaign days when Hillary Clinton was being attacked by Chuck Todd and others as perhaps over-prepared for the presidency, the Tracy Flick of those seeking the presidency. And here we have a president who won't even read his one pages. Remember where everyone was supposed to reduce everything to one page, no more than 9 bullet points, lots of pictures, won't even read those anymore. And it's really rather amazing. And our Twitter friend Grudging1, if you're looking for his address on Twitter, pulling an actual quote, he says, from the piece, "What are you reading?" Someone who's talking to Trump in the Oval Office. Trump says, "Look over there. There are some books that I don't even know what they are." Couldn't tell you the title of any of them. But interestingly, apparently, remember that interview from way back that Mein Kampf was in his house at some point? That one, he's got that. I don't know what I'm reading. Just some of them are about Hitler, or were written by Hitler. Yeah, news story from today. Carol Leonig, Shane Harris, Greg Jaffe on this one. Is that Jaffe? That name came up. Was that the same guy? Or is it a different Jaffe from the article Darwin was reading us? All right. Breaking with tradition. Trump skips president's written intelligence report and relies on oral briefings. Well, he won't ever be caught not reading the presidential daily briefing on a one particular day anyway, because he's not reading the presidential daily briefing every day. For much of the past year, President Trump has declined to participate in a practice followed by the past 7 of his predecessors. He rarely, if ever, reads the president's daily brief. 14 other people do, by the way. But he doesn't touch it. A document that lays out the most pressing information collected by U.S. intelligence agencies from hotspots around the world. Trump has opted to rely on an oral briefing of select intelligence issues in the Oval Office rather than getting the full written document delivered to review separately each day, according to 3 people familiar with his briefings. Reading the traditionally dense intelligence book is not Trump's preferred, quote, style of learning, which he doesn't have one of. According to a person with knowledge of the situation, the arrangement underscores Trump's impatience with exhaustive classified documents that go to the commander-in-chief, material that he has said he prefers condensed as much as possible. But by not reading the daily briefing, the president could hamper his ability to respond to crises in the most effective manner, intelligence experts warned. He's too dumb to be president. Impeach him, in case anyone out there is listening. Soon after Trump took office, analysts sought to tailor their intelligence sessions for a president with a famously short attention span who is known for taking in much of information from conservative Fox News channel. The oral briefings were augmented with photos, videos, and graphics, the original guerrilla channel, if you will. After several months, Trump made clear he was not even interested in receiving those. By the way, interested in reviewing a personal copy of the written intelligence report known as the PDB, a highly classified summary prepared before dawn to provide the president with the best update of the world's events, according to people with knowledge of the situation. People risking their lives around the world, and then here in D.C., where they're not probably risking their lives, working to get this thing together pre-dawn for an idiot who, A, doesn't even leave the bedroom until 11 in the morning anyway, and B, couldn't read it if he wanted to. He's too dumb. Administration officials defended Trump's reliance on oral sessions and said he gets full intelligence briefings, noting that presidents have historically sought to receive such information in different ways. Michael Anton, a spokesman for the National Security Council, said Trump is an avid consumer of intelligence, appreciates the hard work of his briefers and of the entire intelligence community, and looks forward every day to the give and take of intelligence briefing. Michael, whatever your name is, go out there and tell him whatever needs to be said. I don't want to be bothered. I'm watching television. That's basically what's going on here. I'm making the impression gets worse as I'm angrier with him. Daniel Coates, you remember that guy, Director of National Intelligence, said in a statement that any notion that President Trump is not fully engaged in the PDB or does not read the briefing materials is pure fiction and is clearly not based on first-hand knowledge of the process. Come on. It wasn't even like, well, it's not that he doesn't read, or rather, it's not that he's not engaged. He just prefers oral briefings to written briefings. No, this guy, Coates, he's there saying, no, he reads the hell out of it every day. He added that Trump's routine sessions with senior intelligence advisors demonstrate his interest in and appreciation for the value of the intelligence provided. In fact, President Trump engages for significantly longer periods than I understand many presidents before have done. Oh my God, you were seriously... Not only that, he reads the most of it in history. Oh, wait a minute. It wasn't me supposed to say that. Daniel Coates was supposed to be saying that. Holy cow. So I'm getting the sense, by the way, that quote that I mentioned from Grudge a few minutes ago probably wasn't pulled from this, but rather a quote from previous interviews about Trump's reading habits. Remember, he also doesn't get to watch any television because he's always reading documents. He's not reading the documents, and he's blocking out executive time to watch television. But Coates says he reads more than anybody in the whole wide world in the history of China. The PDB, which has been described as a newspaper with the smallest circulation in the world, is drawn from material provided by U.S. spies, satellites, and surveillance technology, as well as news sources and foreign intelligence agencies. Several intelligence experts have said that the president's aversion to diving deeper into written intelligence details, the homework that past presidents have done to familiarize themselves with foreign policy and national security, makes both him and the country more vulnerable. He's endangering us. He's extremely careless, one might even say, with these things. Meanwhile, 14 other people are getting this thing brought to them each day, and who knows whether they're reading it. I'm going to skip down just a little bit just to grab this part. This jumps out at me. The president asks hard questions. Pompeo said in public remarks last month, he's deeply engaged. We have a rambunctious back and forth, all aimed at making sure we're delivering him the truth as best we understand it. Trump admirers say he has a unique ability to cut through conventional foreign policy wisdom and ask questions that others have long taken for granted. Why are we even in Somalia? Or why can't I just pull out of Afghanistan? He will ask, according to officials. The president asks edge questions, said one senior administration official, meaning he pushes his staff to question long-held assumptions about U.S. interests in the world. No. Buzzer, please. I don't think I have that sound effect, but time out. What he is doing is showing you that he is an ignorant moron. Why are we even in Somalia? I don't know. I write you a newspaper every effing morning that tells you why we're in Somalia, and you won't read it because you want to watch Fox and Friends and anger tweet whatever they tell you. That's why you don't know why we're in Somalia. It's not because you're cutting through the red tape. It's because you're an idiot and you don't know anything. Why can't I just pull out of Afghanistan? Because that's not how anything works. There are pretty serious implications to it. The entire intelligence community is telling you daily why you can't. Now, I will point this out. I should probably concede at this moment. Sure, they're telling you you have to stay in so that you just believe it. And maybe on some alternative Earth, that is a good point. And maybe presidents stay overcommitted or overcommit the military or are too quick to commit the military because they're being convinced to do so by the writers of the PDB. And a smarter president, I would perhaps trust to either at least read the PDB with a jaundiced eye, or even maybe you could argue to me they could avoid it, because I believe they are information gatherers from other sources, and maybe that's a good thing. Doter J. Trump? No, I do not believe he is getting his information from anywhere else worthwhile. And he's not asking these questions because they're edge questions. They are moron questions. He doesn't know the answer as to what were doing in Somalia. And you could question the overall commitment in Somalia or Afghanistan. Yes, that has to be open to you as a president. As a person who understands the world, I want that to be a question that you ask yourself, at least, from time to time. But what is Somalia? And how come we got how many numbers guns in Big M military? Show me tank is not an edge question. It's a moron question. Please. That's the most ridiculous cover I've ever seen for something like this. Wow. That's astonishing. Anyway, there's actually much more to this. You'll have to read it and see for yourself whether or not the I don't read anything, I don't know, look at some books over there, actually comes from this article or not. It's too long for me to get to all of it today. Of course, too long for me to get to half of the things that I really needed to touch on, including many things still stuck in pocket. I know there was at least one or two things. The Russia story that's heating up. Deripaska, all over the news. Washington Post wrote this one up. A new video from the opposition leader out there in Russia, Navalny, putting together a very intriguing look at Oleg Deripaska and his possible connection to the various pieces of the Trump-Russia puzzle, not just Paul Manafort, but some very interesting stuff out there. Washington Post will summarize that for you. I, unfortunately, have got to wrap things up. Otherwise, I'll have an aneurysm. You hear it happening right here on the air as I speak. Time to move on and to hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam to wrap things up on the many, many things that we had to leave aside for the day. With the Winter Olympics opening, I'll include this other one too. Just to harken back to olden days on the show when we occasionally took what seemed like weird tangents into the corruption of FIFA, the Worldwide Soccer Association, and occasionally other international sporting events as well. A good reminder that it was a Russian oligarch mobster who was once found to have fixed the Winter Olympics, specifically the pairs skating in the 2002 Winter Olympic Games. That now back on my mind, along with many other things that we just couldn't get to, but that's the big function over at the Justice Putnam West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see if we can't grab some of the top stories today. Yes, here we are. Russians. Why were there so many Russians at this year's prayer breakfast? I didn't even realize that was the case. The hymnals, he says, must have been in Cyrillic. What else has he got? A Montana state worker refused a demand from ICE to help round up undocumented immigrants by quitting his job instead. Newly released documents reveal the California Highway Patrol assured neo-Nazis they were the victims as they busted black identity anti-racist demonstrators at neo-Nazis.
Daily Co's Radio.
That the neo-Nazis had attacked and stabbed. My goodness.
You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
All right, well, let's try and cram this one in there. Tim Kaine has demanded the release of a secret memo that reveals the war powers Donald Trump believes he legally possesses. That's an interesting one. We got to get a hold of that one. What else has he got? How about considering how Republicans are using long forbidden tactics to chip away at judicial independence? Certainly important. All of that and more next.